Sam Hamill. Thank you very much, Sam. Rita Wong, Protection. Rita Wong is the author of 3 books of poetry. Sybil Unrest, co-written with Larissa Line Books 2008. Forage, winner of Canada Reads Poetry 2011, and Monkey Puzzle. She lives on the unceded Coast Salish territories, otherwise known as Vancouver, where her work investigates the relationship between contemporary poetics, social justice, ecology, and decolonization. Wong's poems have been published in anthologies and magazines across the country, including Innovative Canadian Women's Poetry and Poetics, the Habris Anthology of Poetry, Making a Difference, Canadian Multicultural Literature, and more. What's your new book? Her most recent collection is Undercurrent, and I think it's just days old. Please welcome Rita Wong.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you all of you for listening, and to the organizers of this conference. It's kind of intimidating to come after Sam Hamill, but I'll try my best. I wanted to just say that I was one of the multitudes who contributed to Poets Against the War when that started, so thank you for that. It was something that was very much needed and is still much needed. So this book is a journey with water and for water. And for me, water is the path to peace. I mean, there are many paths to peace, but for me, it comes from learning with water and respecting the watershed and working together, because the well-being of the watershed is our well-being. So in a sense, I can think about this book as a response to your work that way. And this is called Declaration of Intent. Let the colonial borders be seen for the pretensions that they are. I hereby honor what the flow of water teaches us, the beauty of enough, the path of peace to be savored, before the extremes of drought and flood overwhelm the careless. Water is a sacred bond, embedded in our plump, moist cells, in our breaths that transpire to return to the clouds that gave us life through rain, in the rivers and aquifers that we and our neighbors drink, in the oceans that our foremothers came from. A watershed teaches not only humbleness, but climate fluency, the languages we need to interpret the sea's rising voice. Water connects us to salmon and cedar, whales and workers, its currents bearing the plastic from our fridges and closets. A gyre of karma recirculates, burgeoning body burden. I hereby invoke fluid wisdom to guide us through the toxic muck. I will apprentice myself to creeks and tributaries, groundwater and glaciers. Listen for the salty pulse within, the blood that recognizes marine ancestry. In its chemical composition and intuitive pull, I will learn through immersion, flotation, and transformation. As water expands and contracts, I will fit myself to its ever-changing dimensions. Molecular and spectacular, water will return what we give it, be that arrogance and poison, reverence and light, ambivalence and respect. Let our societies be revived as watersheds. Because I am part of the problem, I can also become part of the solution. Although I am part of the problem, I can also become part of the solution. Where I am part of the problem, I need to be part of the solution. While I am part of the problem, can I also be part of the solution? One part silt, one part clear running water, one part blood, love, sweat. Not tar, but tears. E inserts a listening, witnessing, quickening I. Broken but rebinding, token but reminding, vocal buck unwinding. The machine's gears rust in rain. Moss and lichen slowly creep life back. The rate of reclamation is humble, while the rate of destruction blasts fast. Because we are part of the problem, we can also become part of the solution. So, who are we? We are the beings who need clean water in order to live a life of dignity, joy, and good relation. Maybe you are part of us without even knowing that you are. Maybe we are the ones who are too often taken for granted or ignored, the quiet witnesses to atrocities, greed, mean-spirited hierarchies, hostages of capitalism. Maybe we are remembering what it means to respect water, because doing so is to respect ourselves, our shared fluid vulnerability, our funny contradictions, our stumbling, dancing, crying, laughing, eating, drinking, pissing, working, playing, burping, farting, messy selves. Maybe we are the thunderstorms that precipitate when too much has been repressed, the weeds that refuse to stop, the coyotes, the grandmothers, the yet unborn. Maybe we are flash floods, demoralized workers, the hospitalized, the angry, entitled children who don't even remember to thank the water that keeps them alive. Maybe we are system change as well as climate change. Dripping and spitting, we rise. This book opens with two epigraphs. One is by the author Lee Miracle, who's been a huge influence on me. And she says that we do not own the water owns itself. And I think that's important to dwell with. And the other epigraph is from Bruce Lee, interviewed, interestingly enough, by Pierre Burton. And Bruce Lee has this to say. He says, "Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. That water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend." And I said this was a journey with water, and I'll read two short pieces that have to do with that, I guess. And I also want to acknowledge that we are on Snuneymuxw traditional territories, and I'd also like to thank Dorothy Christian, who's a friend of mine, who's a filmmaker from the Okanagan Shpokmuk First Nations, and she started this journey for me when she asked two questions. Some of you have heard me say this in the morning, but I need to repeat it. One is, can you love the land like I do? And the other question that Dorothy had to ask is, what can you do to protect the sacred water? So this book is a response to those questions. And this poem is called Journey to the West. It is written, I guess, I'll talk about it after I read it. Canoe journeyers are coast, protecting itself. Where ocean meets rock is home. When ocean meets oil is poison. One container crash turns fresh sea urchin breakfast into wretched carcinogen. If nothing ever spills, leaks, or collides, implausible and impossible, the burn itself still bankrupts children's lives, forecloses futures. Earth monkey, girl spirit, one of millions whose parents migrated to Turtle Island on this journey to the west, modestly does what the coast calls us to do, to protect future monkeys. Even a future for corporations depends on guardians protecting the coastal home that we are part of, home in the basic sense, ancient as basic stone. In 2014, in the spring, I was canoeing in the River of Golden Dreams near Whistler, BC. And I fell in when we snagged on a branch and suddenly tipped over. And the shock of the cold river awoke me into vigilance. Wearing a life jacket did not eliminate the fear I felt as the river enveloped me completely and reminded me of its power. Ironically, for somebody who wrote a book with water, I cannot swim. And yeah, it's kind of scary. And though I've taken lessons over the years and continue to try learning again in an on-again, off-again way as skin and health permit, I've improved over the years, but I find myself woefully clumsy and tense in the water as it conducts so much sound and stimulus. It's thicker than air. So how does somebody write a book with and for water and not swim? Well, very humbly and carefully and respectfully, I would say. And it's not so much that I fear the water as I fear my own inability to maneuver in it, based in part on my reluctance to relax, the resistance to submit to water's own dynamics. And this is partly what I mean when I say that I am still learning water's syntax. But I mean that in a much larger way, too. One water body flows together with other water bodies, a whole greater than its parts. And I really do believe that what you cannot do alone, you will do it together. So, thanks to the river's prompting, I will return to the swim lessons when the time and conditions are right. In the meantime, even for those of us who don't swim, water rules. Our cities and lifestyles are built upon it, whether we know it or not. Try going a day or 3 without water. Water gives us life. What do we give back to water? And in the summer of 2014, I was honored to read one of Chief Dan George's poems at the Salish Seas Festival, hosted by the Tsleil-Waututh Sacred Trust. The Tsleil-Waututh Sacred Trust has been doing amazing work, legal work and cultural work to protect this coast from oil. And in the poem Words to a Grandchild, Chief Dan George writes, "Each day brings an hour of magic. Listen to it." That day, I felt the hour of magic while joining the canoe ceremony held by the Tsleil-Waututh in Burrard Inlet. As poets, we were invited along, and I was excited to participate. I was also terrified because I can't swim. What if I tipped the canoe by accident? What if I didn't pull my weight? As I entered the canoe, though, I said my name out loud in Cantonese and English. I put my fear aside, and I focused on paddling, trying to keep up with the dozen or so paddlers on the large ceremonial canoe. The fear was still there, lodged in my body, but I did not give it strength. Instead, I paddled hard with my right side, prayed for the water, and tried to follow instructions as best I could. The ceremony was mind-blowing, body-tiring, heart-opening, and spirit-lifting. There's still a long way to go in this journey with water, which is also a journey of becoming worthy to live as a guest on these sacred lands of the Coast Salish peoples. But that day taught me the power of what can be accomplished together. Not much in my Albertan education as somebody who grew up in Calgary, not much in that education prepared me for that moment of sheer love for the land, the water, and for life. But luckily, something deeper within, both younger and older at once, recognized the gift of that moment. And for that gift, I want to thank the Tsleil-Waututh Sacred Trust for their generous and courageous leadership. I also want to thank Matham, also known as the Bow River, whose waters kept me alive the first 20 years of my life, and who taught me the power of water from an early age, as it steadily flowed through the city of Calgary where I grew up. That river, whether I knew it or not, is what prepared me to love this inlet, other rivers, and the ocean. In the work with water, it's also taken me up to the tar sands, and specifically to the healing walk in the tar sands, and this poem comes out of that. It's called Fresh Ancient Ground, and it has 2 epigraphs at the beginning. One is by Melina Labukan Massimo. She's a Lubicon Cree woman who's been doing amazing work, speaking at U.S. Congress about the effect of the tar sands on her people in northern Alberta, and just being ceaseless in her efforts. And she says that since 1978, over $14 billion have been taken out of her traditional territory, yet her family still goes without running water. And the other epigraph is something from an article, a news article. James Cameron, when he was visiting the tar sands, he said, "When you can't trust the water, it's terrifying. Can the water trust us?" Chasing temporary jobs that evaporate like so much acid rain drifting into Saskatchewan. Overburden removal leaves poisonous, polycyclic, aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. The PAHs stink. Swallow them and die a slow, cancerous death. Those who don't respect the magic of ice are doomed to melt it for their descendants. As miles of living medicines made by rivers over millennia are unceremoniously eradicated, annihilated, wasted. Everything leaking everywhere was not meant to go, rainbow in the sky or on slick oil. Held captive by toxic water, undrinkable yet somehow thinkable, blistering fish inside out, thirsty children sickened, caribou killed by omnibus rampage, eliminating water from legislation, and the federal abdication of responsibility. What is the language of decay, and how can we not afford to learn that dialect? 350, 398, 400, 450, as the outer count changes the inner one. We walk for healing the scar sands in a living pact with the bears, the eagles, the muzzled scientists, the beavers who built dams you can see from outer space. Step by step, we conduct ceremony for those who don't know any better or don't care, broken whole, waiting for our sisters and brothers to catch up with wind, sun, and water. So, from 2010 to 2013, I committed to participate in the Healing Walk for the tar sands, as well as a fifth year helping to organize a Solidarity Healing Walk in Montreal. And I have no words big enough for the horror I feel when I see and smell the tar sands. Bearing witness to the devastation is one of the hardest things I've ever done. And alone, I would have curled into a fetal ball and sobbed for what's been lost and destroyed. Even now, when I think about the land up north and I let myself feel the brutality that's been normalized through industry, my throat stops and my eyes fill with tears. In the company of the healing walkers led by indomitable Cree and Dene elders and everyday people, determined keepers of the Athabasca, mothers, fathers, aunties, uncles, concerned citizens, we somehow reassert human responsibilities to land, water, life. These responsibilities can be fostered or ignored by the cultures we're raised in, but the responsibilities and relationships remain, regardless of how we're socialized. They're embedded in each breath we take, each sip of water we swallow, each bite of food provided by the land. No matter how much humans manipulate, redirect, reshape, or try to control what the earth provides. Whether or not we were taught these responsibilities by our families and education systems, we can still learn how to address them. We can remember that dignity and meaning comes from keeping the earth healthy for future generations, for all living creatures, plants and animals, not just humans. We can look frankly at what's not going well, and that's an understatement. The destruction of natural habitat, the dangers posed by global warming, the inequities and violence in our own cultures. And we can do better. We're capable of it if we care to try. For me, that work of trying and of doing better has really been a process of listening to and learning from and with Indigenous peoples, and not in a way that's appropriative or trying to speak for anybody else but myself, but in a way that's about speaking nearby or speaking with. And this poem is called J28. It was written for an action day for Idle No More, and there was a call for round dances and activities, and so this poem is a response to that. And I feel, as I said, I grew up in Calgary, and I never imagined round dancing outside Stephen Harper's office. Growing up in Calgary, you can't imagine even critiquing oil, right? And I come to this critique from a place of love. I come to it with a place from a question of what do I give back to this industry that has funded my public education system, that has funded a lot of things that I've benefited from, and what's the best gift to give back? It's not to shut up, it's not to give up, it's not to just say oil is okay, it's to figure out what the switch is, what the move is, the shift is to another system, the next system, to build those paths of resilience somehow in the midst of a very daunting military-industrial complex. So, J28. Last year, I never imagined we would be round dancing in Glenmore Landing, round dancing in Chinook Center, round dancing in Olympic Plaza, round dancing in Metro Town, round dancing in West Edmonton Mall, round dancing outside the Cayuga Courthouse, round dancing on Akwesasne, round dancing on Strombo, Haichka, Masicho, Olalin, Negwich. Drumming at Waterfront Station, drumming at the United Nations, drumming at Columbia University, drumming at Granville in Georgia, drumming at Dalhousie University, drumming at the Peace Arch, drumming on Wellington Street, drumming on Lubicon Lands, drumming in Owen Sound, drumming in Thunder Bay, drumming in Samba Cay, drumming in Chicago, drumming in Chilliwack, drumming in Kitimat. Taking a much-needed pause for thought on Tar Sands Highway 63, on the 401, on CN rail tracks with Omnijong courage, a human river on Ambassador Bridge. Time to stop and respect. Remember, we are all treaty people, unless we live on unceded lands, where shitty guests can learn to be better ones, by repealing Bill C-45 for starters. We have to stand together in many places, all at once. J11, J16, J28, Indigenous Spring, 8 Fire Summer, Autumn Wisdom, Winter Sleep, to renew Indigenous Spring, again and again. It is Gandhi we need to align ourselves with. Gandhi and Gaia and Vandana and Maud, and marbled murrelets and mycorrhizal mats. Winona and Ward and Jaggi and Arundhati, and phytoplankton and peregrine falcons. Naomi and Oren and Tugastai and Jeanette and Lee, and bittermelon and bees. Percy and Sheev and Jack and Elizabeth, and chrysanthemum greens and canola now radiated. Yoko and Yesmen and Christos and Dion, and dolphins and prairie dogs. Teresa and Melina and Pamela and Rosa Parks, and salmon and cedar. Wab and Harsha and Clayton and Ariel, and eider ducks and water bears. Takaya and Roxana and Glenn and David, and wolves and whales. There is a time for pies, and there is a time for rocks, and beavers and snowy plovers. There is a time for poems and a time for rifles, and coral reefs and caribou. There is also a time for the Haudenosaunee wampum belt, a time for you. 2 rivers running side by side, as long as one party doesn't try to dam or kill the other's river. And a time for spinning wheels. It is Super Barrio, who stopped 10,000 evictions in Mexico, who I look to. It is the Zapatistas, the Mohawks, the KI, the Lilinian, the Mother Earth water walkers, the 20-year-olds suddenly in Parliament, the grannies and the grandkids. It is the children I will never see, but who I hope will live and drink clean, wild water. And this is written with gratitude to Chief Teresa Spence and Idle No More for participatory leadership in the service of lands, waters, and all living beings. And I'll close with a poem called Holders, and I'd like to dedicate this to Janet Marie Rogers and to Joanne Arnott. I'm feeling their absence very keenly at this moment. And I just want to send them some love and thanks, and yeah, just missing them. 2 things about this poem before I get into it. One is it was written after seeing that image of a woman holding a feather, stopping or blocking riot police out in Elsipogtog on the East Coast. Just this one woman kneeling in front of all these men in black uniforms, and that image really haunts me in terms of what that woman was doing in terms of protecting the land and the water. And this poem is not so much about that as it is a response to that. And also, I mentioned earlier Melina's work in terms of the tar sands, but Melina is also a woman who's lost her sister. Her sister is somebody who was murdered, one of the 1,200 and growing number of murdered and missing women in Canada. So that violence, I think, is something that we need to keep talking about, and we need to figure out how to change and to work together to shift. So this poem is for these women. Holders. The women hold space like trees do, sweet fresh air between their tender branches. Unseen roots draw deep down into dark, moist sustenance, making homes for songbirds, windsong, and children who puff with asthmatic exertion. The women stand in front of army trucks and policemen, uniforms and riot gear, with only their soft skin and clear eyes to protect their beating hearts. The mothers, the sisters, the aunties, the grannies, the daughters, crack open the ugly pavement of unjust laws, and find old rivers underneath. Quietly, firmly, they pray and burn offerings for the four directions to come together in sacred commitment to all of creation. The frogs, the slugs, the hummingbirds, the whales, the mountains, the creeks, the laughing ones and the crying ones, the tough ones and the weak ones, the silly ones and the serious ones, the clowns and the cooks, the farmers and the fishers. The women dig their toes into the generous earth, remembering their mothers and their neighbors, their relatives who fly and those who swim. The women have forgotten so much, but they are starting to remember. No matter how many of them have been killed, beaten, insulted, the women continue to stand together. The women plant trees and gardens. The women eat fresh peaches and canned huckleberries. They compost and compile recipes. The women forage for mushrooms and cultivate stubborn corn. They praise the sun and the night with their toil. They tickle each other and guffaw. The women lick their lips with gusto. They perch on the edge of teetering cities. They jump into organic fields. The women build homes with their beloveds. The women find ways to laugh even when life is not funny. The women remain. Thank you.